6 months after his wife of 40 years died, Lloyd Sunderland's sister drove from Boko Raiden to Cayman Key to visit him. She brought with her a dark gray puppy which she said was a border collie Moody mix. Lloyd had no idea what a Moody was, and he didn't care. "I don't want a dog, Beth. A dog is the last thing in the world I want. I can barely take care of myself." "That's obvious," she said, unhooking the puppy's toy-sized leash. "How much weight have you lost?" "I don't know." She appraised him. "Oh, I'd say 15 pounds, which you could afford to give, but not much more. I'm going to make you a sausage scramble with toast. You got eggs?" "I don't want a sausage scramble," Lloyd said, eyeing the dog. It was sitting on the white shag carpet, and he wondered how long it would be before it left a calling card there. The carpet needed a good vacuum and probably a shampoo, but at least it had never been peed on. The dog was looking at him with its amber eyes, almost seeming to study him. "Do you or do you not have eggs?" "Yes, but... And sausage?" "No, of course not. You've probably been living on frozen waffles and Campbell's soup. I'll get some at Publix. But first, I'll inventory your fridge and see what else you need." She was his older sister by 5 years, had mostly raised him after their mother died, and as a child, he had never been able to stand against her. Now they were old, and he still could not stand against her, especially not with Marion gone. It seemed to Lloyd that there was a hole in him where his guts had been. They might come back, might not. 65 was a little old for a generation. The dog, though, against that he would stand. What in the name of God had Bethy been thinking? "I'm not keeping it," he said, speaking to her back as she stalked on her stork legs into the kitchen. "You bought it, you can take it back." "I didn't buy it. The mother was a purebred border collie that got out and mated with the neighbor's dog. That was the Moody. The mother's owner managed to give the other 3 pups away, but this one's the runt and nobody wanted her. The guy, he's a small patch truck farmer, was about to take her to the shelter when I came along and saw a sign tacked to the telephone pole, 'Who wants a dog?' it said. And you thought of me." Still eyeing the puppy, who was eyeing him back, the cocked ear seemed to be the biggest part of her. "Yes." "I'm grieving, Beth." She was the only person whom he could state his situation so baldly, and it was a relief. "I know." Bottles rattled in the open fridge. He could see her shadow on the wall as she bent and rearranged. She really is a stork, he thought, a human stork, and she'll probably live forever. A grieving person needs something to occupy his mind, something to take care of. That's what I thought of when I saw that sign. It's not a case of who wants a dog, it's a case of who needs a dog. That's you! Jesus Christ, this fridge is a mold farm! I'm so grossed out. The puppy got to her feet, and took a tentative step towards Lloyd, and then changed her mind, assuming it had one, and sat down again. "Keep her yourself." "Absolutely not! Jim's allergic. Bethy, you have 2 cats. He's not allergic to them?" "Yes, and the cats are enough. If that's the way you feel, I'll just take the puppy to the shelter on Pompano Beach. They'll give them 3 weeks before they euthanize them. She's a good-looking little thing with that smoky fur. Someone may take her before her time is up." Lloyd rolled his eyes, even though she wasn't there to see him do it. He had often done the same thing at the age of 8, and Beth told him that if he didn't clean up his room, she'd give him 5 on his bottom with a badminton racket. Some things never change. "Yeah, well, pack your bags," he said. "We're gonna go on one of Beth Young's all-expense-paid guilt trips." She shut the fridge and came back into the living room. The puppy glanced at her, and then resumed her inspection of Lloyd. "I'm going to Publix, where I can expect to spend well over $100. I'll bring you the checkout tape, and you can reimburse me." "And what am I supposed to do in the meantime?" "Well, why don't you get to know the defenseless puppy you're going to send to the gas chamber?" She bent to pat the top of the puppy's head. "Look at those hopeful eyes." What Lloyd saw in those amber eyes was only watchfulness. Evaluation. "What am I supposed to do if she pees on the shag?" "Marion had this installed just before she got sick." Beth pointed to the toy-sized leash on the hassock. "Take her out, introduce her to Marion's overgrown flower bed, and by the way, he won't hurt that carpet much, it's filthy." She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. thin legs scissoring in their old, self-important way. "A pet is the absolute worst present you could give someone," Lloyd said. "I read that on the internet." "Where everything is true, I suppose." She paused to look back at him. The harsh September light of Florida's west coast fell on her face, showing the way that her lipstick had bled into the little wrinkles around her mouth, the way her lower lids had begun to sag away from her eyes, and the fragile clock spring of veins beating into the hollows of her temples. She would be 70 soon. His bouncing, opinionated, athletic, take-no-prisoner sister would be old. So was he. They were proof that life was nothing but a short dream on a summer afternoon. Only Bethy still had her husband, 2 grown children, and 4 grandchildren. Nature's nice multiplication. He had Marion. But Marion was gone. And there were no children. Was he supposed to replace his wife with a mongrel puppy? The idea was as corny and as idiotic as a Hallmark card, and just as unrealistic. "I'm not keeping her!" She gave him the same look that she'd given him as a girl of 13, the one that said the badminton racket would soon make an appearance if he didn't shape up. "You are, at least, until I get back from Publix. I have some other errands to run too, and dogs die in hot cars, especially little ones." She closed the door. Lloyd Sunderland, retired, 6 months a widower. These days, not very interested in food or any of life's other pleasures. Sat staring at the unwelcome visitor on his shag carpet. The dog stared back. "Yeah, what are you looking at? Foolish?" The puppy got up and walked towards him. Waddled, actually, as if through high weeds. It sat down again by his foot, looking up. Lloyd lowered his hand tentatively, expecting a nip. The dog licked him instead. He got the toy leash and attached it to the puppy's small pink collar. "Come on, get you off this rug while it's still time." He tugged the leash. The puppy only sat and looked at him. Lloyd sighed and picked her up. She licked his hand again. He carried her outside and put her down in the grass. It needed mowing. She almost disappeared. Beth was right about the flowers, too. They looked awful. Half of them as dead as Marion. This thought made him smile, although smiling at such a comparison made him feel like a bad person. The dog's waddle was even more pronounced in the grass. She went a dozen or so steps, then lowered her hind end and peed. Not bad. Still not keeping you." Already suspecting that when Beth went back to Boca, the dog wouldn't be with her. No, this unwanted visitor would be here with him, in his house 1/2 mile from the drawbridge that connected Key to the mainland. It wouldn't work. He had never owned a dog in his life, but until he found someone who would take her, she might give him something to do besides watch TV or sit in front of his computer playing solitaire, surfing sites that had seemed interesting when he first retired and now bored him to death. When Beth returned almost 2 hours later, Lloyd was back in his easy chair, and the puppy was back on the carpet, sleeping. His sister, whom he loved, but who had irritated him his whole life, irritated him further today by coming back with a lot more than he had expected. She had a large bag of puppy chow, generic, of course, and a large container of plain yogurt, which, when added to the puppy's food, was supposed to strengthen the cartilage in those radar dish ears. Beth also brought puppy pee-pee pads, a dog bed, 3 chew toys, 2 of which squeaked annoyingly, and a child's playpen that would keep the puppy from wandering in the night, she said. "Jesus, Bethy, how much did that cost?" "It was on sale at Target," she said, dodging the question in a way that he was familiar with. "No charge, my treat, and now that I've bought all of this, you still want me to take her back. If you do, you get the job of doing the returns." Lloyd was used to being outplayed by his sister. "I will give it a trial run, but do not appreciate being saddled with the responsibility. You always were high-handed." "Yes," he said, "with Mother gone and Dad a functional but basically hopeless drunk. I have to be. Now, how about the scramble? All right. Has she peed in the rug yet? No. She will. Beth actually sounded pleased with the idea. No great loss either. So, what are you going to name her? If I name her, she's mine, Lord thought. Only, he suspected, she was his already, and had been from the very first tentative lick, the way that Marion had been from the first kiss. Another stupid comparison. But could you control how your mind sorted things? No more than you could control your dreams. Laurie. Why Laurie? I don't know. Just came to me. Well, she said, that's all right. Laurie followed them into the kitchen, waddling. Lloyd papered the white shag carpet with puppy pads and set up the playpen in his bedroom, pinching his fingers in the process. Then went to his study, fired up his computer, and began reading an article titled, "So You Have a New Puppy." Halfway through it, he had become aware that Laurie was sitting beside his shoe, looking up at him. He decided to feed her, and found a puddle of pee in the archway between the kitchen and the living room, not 6 inches from the nearest puppy pad. He picked Laurie up and set her down next to the pee and said, "Not here." Then he put her down on the pristine pad. "Do it here." She looked at him, then did her puppy waddle back into the kitchen, where she laid down by the stove with her snout in one paw, watching him. Lloyd grabbed a handful of paper towels. He had an idea he was going to be using a lot of them in the next week or so. Once the puddle was cleaned up, a very small one, there was that, put a 1/4 cup of puppy chow, the recommended dosage according to So You Have a New Puppy, in a cereal bowl and mixed it with yogurt. The puppy tucked in willingly enough. While he was watching her eat, his phone rang. It was Beth calling from a rest area somewhere in the wilds of Alligator Alley.
"You should take her to a vet,"
she said.
"I forgot to tell you that."
"I know, Bethy." It was in So You Have a New Puppy. She went on as if he hadn't spoken, another trait that he knew well.
"She'll need vitamins, I think, and heartworm medicine for sure, plus something for fleas and ticks. It's probably a pill that they eat with their food. Also, she'll need to be fixed, spayed, but probably not for a couple of months."
"Yes," he said, "if I keep her." Laurie had finished eating and wandered away towards the living room. With a belly full, her waddle was more pronounced. Lloyd, she looked a little drunk.
"Remember to walk her."
"Right. Every 4 hours, according to So You Have a New Puppy," which was ridiculous. He had no intention of getting up at 2 in the morning to take his uninvited guest outside. Mind reading was another of his sister's specialties.
"You're probably thinking that getting up in the middle of the night is going to be a hassle."
"Yeah, that crossed my mind." She ignored this, as only Bethy could.
"But if you're telling the truth about having insomnia since Marion died, I don't really think it would be a hardship."
"Yeah, that's understanding and caring of you, Bethy."
"See how it goes, that's all I'm saying. Give the little girl a chance."
She paused.
"Give yourself a chance while you're at it. I worry about you, Lloyd. I worked in an insurance company for almost 40 years, and I can tell you that men your age run a much greater risk of disease after a spouse dies. And death, of course."
To this, he said nothing.
"Will you?"
"Will I what?" As if he didn't know.
"Give her a chance."
Beth was pushing for a commitment Lloyd was unwilling to give. He looked around as if for inspiration and spied a turd. One single small sausage exactly where the puddle of pee had been 6 inches from the nearest puppy pad. "Well, the little girl's here now," he said. It was the best he could give her. "You drive safe."
65 the whole way. I get passed a lot, and some people honk at me, but any faster and I don't trust my reflexes.
He said goodbye, grabbed some more paper towels, and picked up the sausage. Laurie watched him with her amber eyes. He took her back outside, where she did nothing. When he finished another puppy rearing article 20 minutes later, he found another puddle of pee in the archway, 6 inches from the nearest puppy pad. He bent over, hands on his knees, his back giving its usual warning twang. "You're on borrowed time, dog." She looked back at him, seeming to study him. Late that afternoon, 2 more puppy peas, one actually on the puppy pad nearest the kitchen, Lloyd attached the toy-sized leash and took Laurie outside, carrying her in the crook of his arm like a football. He sat her down and urged her along the path that ran behind this small development of houses. The path led to a shallow canal which eventually flowed beneath the drawbridge. Traffic there was currently backed up, waiting for some Mr. Rich Guy's expensive toy to pass from Oscar's Bay into the Gulf of Mexico. The puppy walked in her usual side-to-side waddle, pausing every now and then to sniff at clumps of weeds that from her perspective must have looked like impenetrable jungle thickets. A dilapidated boardwalk known as 6 Mile Path. For some reason Lloyd had never understood, since it was a mile long at most. Ran beside the canal, and his next-door neighbor was standing there now between signs saying no littering and no fishing. Further down was one meant to say, watch for alligators. Only alligators had been spray-painted over and replaced with Democrats. Seeing Don Pitcher hunched over his fancy mahogany cane and hauling at his truss always gave Lloyd a small but unmistakable frisson of mean satisfaction. The man was a jukebox of tiresome political opinions, and also an unapologetic gore crow. If anyone in the neighborhood died, Don knew it first. If anyone in the neighborhood was running into financial headwinds, he knew that too. Lloyd's own back was no longer what it had been, nor were his eyes and ears. He was still years from the cane and the truss, or so he hoped. "Hey, look at that boat," Don said as Lloyd joined him on the boardwalk. Laurie, perhaps frightened of the water, hung back at the edge of her leash. "How many poor people do you think that would feed in Africa?" "I don't think even hungry people would eat a boat, Don." "You know what Hey, what do you got there, new puppy? Oh, ain't he cute?" "That's a she," Lloyd said. "I'm keeping her for my sister." "Hey there, sweetie," Don said, leaning forward and holding out his hand. Laurie backed away and barked for the first time since Beth had brought her over. 2 high, sharp yaps, then silence. Don straightened up again. "That's not too friendly, is she?" She doesn't know you." "She shit around?" Not too bad," Lloyd said. And for a while, they watched the motor sloop. Laurie sat at the edge of the splintery boardwalk and watched Lloyd. "My wife won't have a dog," Don said. "Says all they are is mess and trouble. I had one when I was a boy. Nice old collie. She fell down a well. Cover was all rotted. Down she went. Had to haul her up with the whatchamacallit." "Oh, is that so?" Yeah. You want to be careful of that one near the road. She runs out in it, and then there goes your ball game. Man, look at the size of that fucking boat. Dime to $1 she grounds." The motor sloop didn't ground. While the drawbridge came back down and the traffic was moving again, Lloyd looked at the puppy and saw her asleep on her side. He picked her up. Laurie opened her eyes, licked his hand, and went back to sleep. I'm gonna go back and burn some supper. Take it easy, Don." You do the same. Keep an eye on that puppy. She'll chew up everything you own." "I've got some toys for her to chew on." Don smiled, revealing a set of mismatched teeth that gave Lloyd the chills. She'll prefer your furniture. You just wait and see." While he was watching the TV news that night, Laurie came to the side of his easy chair and gave those same 2 sharp yaps. Lloyd considered her bright-eyed stare, weighed the 2 pros and cons, and then picked her up and set her in his lap. "You wet on me and you die," he said. She didn't wet on him. She went to sleep with her nose under her tail. Lloyd stroked her absently while he watched cell phone footage of a terrorist attack on Belgium. When the news was over, he took Laurie outside once more using the football carry. He attached the leash and let her walk to the edge of the Oscar Road, where she squatted and she did her business. "Right idea," Lloyd said. Hold that thought. At 9 o'clock, he lined the playpen with a double layer of puppy pads. He could see that he'd have to buy more tomorrow, along with more paper towels, and he lowered her in. She sat, watching him. When he gave her some water in a teacup, she lapped for a while, and then laid down, still watching him. Lloyd undressed to his underwear and laid down himself, not bothering to pull back the coverlet. He had learned from experience that if he did that, he would find it on the floor in the morning, the victim of his tossing and turning. The night, however, he fell asleep almost immediately, and he didn't wake up until 2 o'clock. The sound of high-pitched cries. Laurie lay with her snout stuck into the bars of the playpen like a lonely inmate in solitary confinement. There were several sausages on the puppy pads. Judging that at such a late hour there would be few, if any, passerbys on Oscar Road to be offended by the sight of a man in his boxers and a strappy t-shirt, Lloyd put on his slippers and carried his visitor. It was how he still thought of Laurie, outside. He put her down on the shell driveway. She waddled around for a bit, sniffing at a splat of bird shit, and peed on it. He told her again to hold that thought. She sat down and looked at the empty road. Lloyd looked up at the stars. He thought he'd never seen so many. Then he decided that he must have. Just not lately. He tried to remember the last time he had been outside at 2 in the morning. And he couldn't. He looked at the Milky Way, almost mesmerized until he realized he was falling asleep on his feet. He carried the puppy back inside. Laurie watched him silently as he changed the puppy pads that she had shat upon. But the keening began again as soon as he put her in the playpen. He considered taking her into the bed with him, but that was a very bad idea according to So You Have a New Puppy. The author, one Suzanne Morris, DVM, stated unequivocally, once you start down that road, you'll have great difficulty turning back. Also, the idea of waking up to find one of those little brown sausages on the side of the bed where his wife had slept did not please him. Not only would it seem symbolically disrespectful, it would mean changing the bed, a chore which also did not please him because he always screwed it up. He went into the room that Marion had called her den. Most of her things were still there because, in spite of his sister's strong suggestions to do so, Lloyd hadn't yet had the heart to clean that place out. He had mostly steered clear of this room since Marion's death. Even looking at the pictures on the wall hurt, especially at 2 in the morning. He thought a person's skin was thinner at 2 a.m. It didn't start to thicken again until 5, when the first light began to show in the east. Marion had never upgraded to an iPod, but the portable CD player that she had taken to her twice-weekly exercise group was on the shelf above her small collection of albums. He opened the battery case and saw no corrosion on the AAAs. He thumbed through her CDs and paused at Hall & Oates. Then he went on to Joan Baez's greatest hits. He mounted the CD, and it spun satisfactory when he closed the lid. He took it into the bedroom. Laurie stopped whining when she saw him. He pressed play, and Joan Baez began singing The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down. He placed the CD on one of the fresh puppy pads. Laurie sniffed it, and then laid down beside it, her nose almost touching the Dymo-tape label reading, Property of Marion Sunderland. "Yeah, will it do?" Lloyd asked. "Goddamn hope so." He went back to bed, and lay with his hand under the pillow, where it was cool. He listened to the music. When Baez sang, "Forever Young," he grizzled a little. So predictable, he thought. Such a cliché. And then, he fell asleep. September gave way to October, the best month of the year in upstate New York. where he and Marion had lived until his retirement. And in Lloyd's opinion, IMHO, as they said on Facebook, the best month down here in the west coast of Florida. The worst of the heat was gone. The days were still warm. The cold nights of January and February were still on the next calendar. Most of the snowbirds were also on the next calendar, and instead of opening and closing 50 times a day, the Oscar drawbridge only impeded traffic a dozen or 20 times. And there was so much less traffic to impede. The Cayman Key Fish House opened after its 3 months hiatus, and dogs were allowed on the so-called puppy patio. Lloyd took Laurie there often, the two of them ambling along 6 Mile path beneath the canal. Lloyd lifted the dog over the places where the boardwalk was overgrown with sawgrass. She trotted easily beneath the overhanging palmetto that Lloyd had to bull his way through, head bent, arm outstretched to push back the thickest clumps, always afraid that a tree rat might fall into his hair, although none ever had. When they arrived at the restaurant, she sat quietly by his shoe in the sunshine, occasionally rewarded for her good manners by a piece of French fry from Lloyd's fish and chips basket. The waitress all oohed over her, bending to stroke her smoky gray fur. Bernadette, the hostess, was particularly taken with her. "That face," she always said, as if that explained everything. She would kneel beside Laurie, which gave Lloyd an excellent and always appreciated view of her cleavage. "Oh, that face!" Laurie accepted this attention, but did not seem to crave it. She simply sat, glancing at her new admirer before returning her attention to Lloyd. Part of that attention might have to do with the French fries, but not all. She looked at him just as studiously when he was watching TV, until, she fell asleep. She toilet trained quickly, and in spite of Don's prediction, she did not chew the furniture. She did chew her toys, which multiplied from 3 to 6 to a dozen. He found an old crate to store them in. Laurie would go to this crate in the morning, put her forepaws on its edge and examine the contents like a public shopper, evaluating the produce. At last, she would select one, take it into the corner, and chew it until it bored her. And she would return to the crate and select another. By the end of the day, they would be scattered all over the bedroom, living room, and the kitchen. Lloyd's final chore before going to bed was picking them up and returning them to the crate. Not because of the clutter, but because the dog seemed to take such satisfaction from surveying her accumulated booty each morning. Beth called often, asking about his eating habits, reminding him of the birthdays and anniversaries of old friends and older relatives, keeping him up to date on who had kicked the bucket. She always ended by asking if Laurie was still on probation. Lloyd said yes. Until one day, in the middle of October. They had just come back from the fish house, and Laurie was sleeping on her back in the middle of the living room floor, legs splayed to the 4 major points of the compass. The breeze from the air conditioner was ruffling her belly fur, and Lloyd realized she was beautiful. It wasn't sentiment, only a fact of nature. He felt the same about the stars when he took her out on her final pee for the evening. "No, I guess we're past the probation stage. But if she outlives me, Bethy, you either take her back and fuck Jim's allergies, or you find a good home for her." "I copy you, Rubber Duck." The Rubber Duck thing was something that she picked up from an old trucking song back in the 70s, and had hung on to it ever since. It was another thing about Beth that Lloyd found simultaneously enduring and annoying as shit. "I'm so pleased it's working out." She lowered her voice. "In truth, I didn't think it would." "Yeah, then why'd you bring her?" "It was a shot in the dark. I knew you needed something more labor-intensive than a goldfish." "Has she learned to bark?" It's more of a yark. She does it when the postman comes, or UPS, or if Don drops by for a beer. Always just the two. Yark, yark. Done. When are you coming up this way?" "Oh, I came last time. It's your turn to come down." "Yeah, well, I'll have to bring Laurie. There's no way I'm leaving her with Don and Evelyn Pitcher." Looking at the sleepy puppy, he realized that there was no way he was leaving her with anyone. Even short trips to the supermarket made him nervous about her, and he was always relieved to see her waiting at the door when he came home. Yeah, then bring her. I'd love to see how much she's grown. Yeah, what about Jim's allergies? Fuck his allergies, he said, and hung up, laughing. After mooning and exclaiming over Laurie, who, other than one stop to relieve her bladder, had slept in the back seat all the way to Boca, Beth reverted to her usual big sister priorities. Although she could nag him on many subjects, she was a virtuoso that way. Her main issue this time was Dr. Albright, and Lloyd's need to see him for an overdue checkup. All right, you look good, she said. I have to say it, you actually appear to have a tan, assuming that's not just jaundice. I can always count on you for a cheerful thought, Betty. It's just sun. I walk Laurie 3 times a day. On the beach when we go up on 6 Mile Path to the fish house, where I have lunch, and back on the beach in the evening, at the sunset. She doesn't care about it. Dogs have no aesthetic sense. But I enjoy it. You walk her on the canal boardwalk? Jesus, Lloyd, that thing's a wreck. It's apt to collapse under you someday and dump you into the canal, along with the princess here. She rubbed the top of Laurie's head. The dog half closed her eyes and appeared to smile. It's been there for 40 years or more. I think it'll outlast me. Have you made the doctor's appointment yet? No, but I will. She held up her phone. Do it now, why don't you? I want to watch you. He could tell by the look in her eyes that she didn't expect him to take her up on this, which was one reason he did it, but not the only reason. In previous years, he had dreaded going to the doctor, kept expecting that moment, no doubt conditioned by too many TV shows, when the doctor would look at him gravely and say, I have some bad news. Now, however, he felt good. His legs were stiff when he got up in the morning, probably from so much walking, and his back was creakier than ever. But when he turned his attention inward, he found nothing worrisome. He knew that bad things could grow unfelt in an old man's body for quite some time, creeping along until it was time to dash. But nothing had progressed to the point where there was an outward manifestation. No bloody stool or sputum, no deep pain in the gut, no trouble swallowing, no painful urination. He reflected that it was so much easier to go to the doctor when your body was telling you there's no reason to do so. What are you smiling about? That sounded suspicious. Nothing. Give me that. He reached for her phone. She held it away from him. If you really mean to do it, use your own. Two weeks after his checkup, Dr. Albright asked him to come in, go over the results. They were good. Yeah, well, your weight, pretty much where it should be. Your blood pressure's fine, ditto reflexes. Cholesterol numbers are better than the last time you let us take some of your blood. I know it's been a while, Lloyd said. Probably too long. No probably about it. Anyway, no need to put you on lipids as of now, which you should see as a victory. At least half my patients your age take them. I do a lot of walking, Lloyd said. My sister gave me a dog, a puppy. Puppies are a god's idea of a perfect workout program. How are you doing otherwise? You coping? Albright didn't need to be more specific. Marion had always been his patient, and far more conscientious than her husband about her 6-month checkups. Very proactive in all things was Marion Sunderland. But the tumor that first robbed her of her intelligence, and then killed her, had been beyond proactivity. It hatched too deep inside. A glioblastoma, Lloyd thought, was God's version of a .45 caliber bullet to the brain. Pretty well, Lloyd said. Sleeping again. I go to bed tired most nights. That helps. Does the dog? Yeah, mostly that. You should call your sister and thank her, Albright said. Lloyd thought that was a good idea. He called her that evening and did so. Beth told him that he was very, very welcome. Lloyd took Laurie down to the beach, then walked her. He watched the sunset. Laurie found the dead fish and peed on it. They both went home, satisfied. December 6th of that year began in the normal way, with a walk on the beach followed by breakfast, Gaines' meal for Laurie, a scrambled egg and a piece of toast for Lloyd. There was no premonition that God was cocking his .45. Lloyd watched the first hour of the Today program, then went into Marion's den. He picked up a little accounting work from the fish house and a car dealership in Sarasota. It was low-pressure stuff, no stress involved, and although his financial needs were met, it was nice to be working again. And he discovered that he liked Marion's desk better than his own. He liked her music, too. Always had. He thought Marion would be glad to know that her place was being used. Laurie sat beside his chair, chewing thoughtfully on her toy rabbit, then took a nap. At 10:30, Lloyd saved his work and pushed back from the computer. "Snack time, girl." He walked. She followed him into the kitchen and accepted a rawhide chew stick. Lloyd had milk and a couple of cookies that had come in an early gift package from Beth. They were burned on the bottom. Burnt Christmas cookies were another of Beth's specialties, but edible. He read for a while. He was working his way through John Sanford's hefty oeuvre, and was eventually roused by a familiar jingling. It was Laurie, by the front door. Her leash was looped over the knob, and she was brushing the steel clip back and forth with her snout. Lloyd looked at his watch and saw it was 11:45. Oh, okay, right. He snapped on her leash, grabbed his left front pocket to make sure he had his wallet, and let Laurie lead him out into the bright light of midday. As they walked down 6 Mile Pass, he saw that Don was pulling out his usual collection of horrible plastic holiday decorations, a nativity scene, sacred, a large plastic Santa, profane, and a collection of lawn gnomes, powdered up to look like elves. At least, Lloyd thought that was the idea. Soon Don would risk his life by climbing a ladder and stringing lights that flashed on and off, making the picture bungalow look like the world's smallest riverboat casino. In previous years, Don's decorations had made Lloyd feel sad. But on this day, he laughed. He had to give the son of a bitch credit. He had arthritis, bad eyes, and a bad back, but he wasn't giving up. For Don, it was Christmas or bust. Evelyn came out on the pitch's back deck. She was wearing a misbuttoned pink wrapper, some kind of whitish-yellow cream smeared on her cheek, and her hair was every which way. Don had confided in Lloyd that his wife had begun to lose the plot a little bit. And today, she certainly looked it. "Have you seen him?" she called. Laurie looked up and gave her trademark greeting, "Yark yark." "Oh, Don?" "No, John Way, of course, Don. Who else?" "No, I haven't," Lloyd said. "Well, if you do, tell him to stop farting around and finish the damn decorations. The lights are dangling and the wise men are still out in the garage. That man is loopy." "If he is, that makes the two of you," Lloyd thought. "Well, I'll pass it along if I see him." Evelyn leaned over the rail, alarmingly far. "That's a good-looking dog you've got there. What's her name again?" "Laurie," Lloyd told her, as he had many times before. "Oh, a bitch, a bitch, a bitch!" Evelyn cried in a kind of Shakespearean fervor and uttered a cackle. "I'll be glad when goddamn Christmas is over. You can tell him that too." She straightened up, a relief. Lloyd did not think he could have caught her if she had fallen, and went back inside. Laurie got to her feet and trotted down to the boardwalk, pointing her snout toward the smell of fried food wafting from the fish house. Lloyd turned with her, looking forward to a piece of broiled salmon on a bed of rice. The fried stuff had begun to disagree with him. The canal meandered. 6 Mile Path meandered with it, lazily turning this way and that, hugging the overgrown bank. Here and there, a board was missing. Laurie paused to watch a pelican dive and come up with a fish wriggling in its satchel beak. Then they went on. She stopped at a spray of sawgrass poking up between two boards that had warped apart. Lloyd lifted her over it by the belly. It was getting too big for the football carry now. A little way further down, just ahead of the next curve, palmetto had grown over the boardwalk, forming a low arch. Laurie was small enough to walk under, but she paused, sniffing at something. Lloyd caught up with her and bent down to see what she'd found. It was Don Pitcher's cane. And although it was made of stout mahogany, a crack ran halfway up its length from the rubber tip. Lloyd picked it up and examined 3 or 4 drops of blood dotting the wood. Well, this isn't good. I think we'd better go back. Laurie bolted ahead. Jerking the leash out of his hand, she disappeared under the green arch. The handle of the leash clattered and spinning behind her. Then the barking began. Not just her usual double yark, but a volley of deeper sounds that he would have said she was incapable of making. Alarmed, Lloyd ducked under the palmetto, waving the cane this way and that to push bunches of it aside. The branches whipped back, scratching at his cheeks and forehead. On some of them were beads and smears of blood. There was more blood on the boards. On the other side, Laurie stood with her front legs spread, her back bowed, and her muzzle touching the boards. She was barking at an alligator. It was dull green and smudged black, a full-grown adult, at least 10 feet long. It stared at Lloyd's barking dog with its lusterless eyes. It was splayed atop Don Pitcher's body, its blunt shovel nose resting on Don's sunburnt neck, its short, scaly forepaws positively cupping Don's bony shoulders. It was the first alligator Lloyd had seen since a trip to Jungle Gardens in Sarasota with Marion, and that had to have been years ago. The top of Don's head was pretty much gone. Lloyd could see splintered bone through what remained of his neighbor's hair. An ooze of blood still wet lay drying on his neck. There were oatmeal-y strands in it. Lloyd realized he was looking at Don Pitcher's brain. That Don had been thinking with that very stuff perhaps only minutes ago seemed to render the whole world meaningless. The handle of Laurie's leash had dropped over the side of the boardwalk and into the canal. She continued to bark. The alligator regarded her for the moment, not moving. It looked remarkably stupid. "Laurie, shut up! Shut the fuck up!" He thought of Evelyn Pitcher standing in her back deck, like an actress on the apron of a stage, crying, "Oh, bitch, a bitch, a bitch." Laurie stopped barking, but continued to growl deep down in her throat. She seemed to have grown twice her size because her cloudy, dark fur was standing out not just on the scuff of her neck, but all over her body. Lloyd dropped to one knee, never taking his eyes off the gator, and plunged his left hand into the canal, feeling for the leash. He found the cord, yanked the handle up, clutching it, and got back to his feet, never taking his eyes from the green-black thing resting on Don's body. He tugged the leash. At first, it was like pulling on a post stuck on the ground. Laurie was that braced, but then she turned towards him. And when she did, the gator raised its tail and brought it down. A flat thwack that sprayed up droplets of water and made the boardwalk tremble. Laurie cringed and jumped onto Lloyd's sneakers. He bent and picked her up, never taking his eyes off the gator. Laurie's body was thrumming as if an electrical current was passing through it. Her eyes were wide enough to show the whites all around. Lloyd had been too stunned by the sight of the alligator astride his dead neighbor's body to be afraid. And when feeling did return, it wasn't fear, but a kind of protective rage. He unclipped the leash from Laurie's collar and dropped it. "Go home, do you hear me? Go home! I'll be right behind you!" He bent down, still not taking his eyes from the alligator, which never took its eyes from him. He had carried Laurie like a football many times when she was smaller, but now he hiked her like one, through his legs and directly into the palmetto arch. There was no time to see where she was going. The alligator came for him. It moved with amazing and total unexpected speed, kicking Don's body several feet behind it, with its stubby rear legs as it pushed off, its mouth open, exposed teeth like a dirty picket fence. On its leathery pinkish-black tongue, Lloyd could see bits of Don's shirt. He struck it with the cane, bringing it around in a sideways sweep. It whacked the side of the gator's head below one of its wildly expressionless eyes and broke along the crack in the mahogany. The broken pieces twirled away and splashed into the canal. The gator stopped for a moment, as if surprised, and then came on. Lloyd could hear the clatter of its teeth, its mouth yawning, its lower jaw skidding across the boardwalk and raising gray splinters. Lloyd thought of nothing. Some deeper part of him took over. He stabbed out with what remained of Don's cane, plunging the jagged end into the whitish flesh at the side of the alligator's shovel head. Grasping the cane's handle with both hands, he leaned forward, pushing his weight into it and pushing as hard as he could. The alligator was momentarily driven sideways before it could recover. There came a rapid series of cracking sounds, like blanks from a track starter's pistol. Part of the old boardwalk slumped, spilling the gator's top half into the canal. Its tail came down, whacking the twisted boards and making Don's body jump. The water boiled. Lloyd struggled for balance and stepped back just as the gator's head surfaced, the jaws snapping. He stabbed at it again, not aiming, but the jagged stub of the cane went into the gator's eye. It reared backward, and if Lloyd hadn't let go of the cane's curved handle, he would have been pulled into the water on top of it. He turned and bolted through the palmetto with his arms outstretched in front of him, expecting at any moment to be bitten from behind or thrust upward as the gator swam under the boardwalk, planting itself on the mucky bottom and battering its way after him. He came out on the other side, daubed and dotted with Don's blood and bleeding from a dozen scratches. Laurie had not gone home. She was standing 10 feet down, and when she saw Lloyd, she raced towards him, bunching her hindquarters and leaping. Lloyd caught her like a football, like a Hail Mary pass, and ran, hardly aware that Laurie was wriggling in his arms and whining and covering his face with frantic licks. Although he would remember this later. Once he was off the boardwalk and on the shell path, he looked back, expecting to see the gator hustling after him along the boardwalk with its eerie, unexpected speed. He made it halfway up the path to his house before his legs gave out and he sat down. He was crying, shaking all over. He kept looking back, watching for the gator. Laurie kept licking his face, but the trembling had begun to subside. When he felt able to walk again, he carried Laurie the rest of the way to his house. Twice he felt faint and had to stop. Evelyn came back onto her deck as he trudged toward the back door. You know, if you carry a dog like that, it will start expecting it all the time. Did you see Don? He needs to finish putting the Christmas decorations up. Did she not see the blood? Lloyd wondered. Or did she not want to see it? There's been an accident. What kind of accident? Did someone run into the goddamn drawbridge again? Go inside. He went inside himself without waiting to see if she did so. He got Laurie a fresh bowl of water, and she lapped at it eagerly. While she did that, Lloyd called 911. The police must have gone to the pitcher's house immediately after retrieving Don's body, because Lloyd heard Evelyn screaming. Those screams probably didn't go on for long, but it seemed long. He wondered if he should go over there, maybe try to comfort her, but he didn't feel that he could. He was more tired than he could have ever remembered, even after high school football practice on hot August afternoons. All he wanted to do was sit in his easy chair with Laurie in his lap. She had gone to sleep, nose to tail. The police came and interviewed him. They told him he had been extremely lucky. Good luck aside, you did some damn good thinking, one of the cops said, using Mr. Pitcher's cane like that. Still would have gotten me if the outside part of the boardwalk hadn't collapsed under its weight, Lloyd said. It probably would have gotten Laurie as well, because Laurie hadn't gone home. Laurie had waited. That night he took her to bed with him. She slept on Marion's side. Lloyd himself slept little. Each time he started to drift off, he thought of how the alligator had splayed on Don's body, with such idiot possessiveness. Its dead black eyes, how it had seemed to grin, the unexpected speed when it had come at him. And he would stroke the dog sleeping beside him. Beth came from Boca the next day. She scolded him, but not until she had hugged him and kissed him repeatedly, making Lloyd think of how frenetically Laurie had licked his face when he had emerged from the palmetto tangle. I love you, you stupid old bastard, Beth said. Thank God you're alive. Then she picked up Laurie and hugged her. Laurie bore this patiently, but as soon as Beth put her down, she went off to find her rubber rabbit. She took it into the corner where she made it squeak repeatedly, Lloyd wondered if she was having a fantasy where she tore the alligator to pieces, and told himself he was being stupid. You didn't make them into something they're not. You hadn't read that, and so you have a new puppy. It was one of the things that you found out on your own. The day after Beth's visit, a game warden from the Florida Fish and Wildlife came to see Lloyd. They sat in the kitchen, and the warden, whose name was Gibson, accepted a glass of iced tea. Laurie enjoyed smelling his boots and pant cuffs for a while, then curled up under the table. "Yeah, we got the gator," Gibson said. "You're lucky to be alive, Mr. Sunderland. It was a damn big one." "Yeah, I know that," Lloyd said. "Has it been euthanized?" No, there's some discussion about whether or not it should be done. When it attacked Mr. Pitcher, it was protecting a clutch of eggs. Nest. That's right." Lloyd called Laurie. Laurie came. He picked her up and began to stroke her. "How long was that thing there? I walk that damn boardwalk down to the fish house with my dog every day." "A normal incubation period's about 6 to 5 days. "That thing was there all that time?" Gibson nodded. "Much of it, yes. Deep in the weeds and sawgrass. Watching us go by. You and everybody else who used the boardwalk. Mr. Pitcher must have done something quite by accident that roused her. Well," Gibson shrugged. "Not maternal instincts, I don't think you could say that, but they're programmed to protect the nest." "Yeah, he probably swung the cane in its direction," Lloyd said. "He was always swinging that cane. Might even have hit her, or the nest." Gibson finished his iced tea and stood up. "I thought you'd like to know." "Thank you." "Sure. A nice little dog you got there. Border collie, or what else?" "Moody." "Okay, yeah, I see that now. And she was with you that day?" "Ahead of me, actually. She saw it first." "Well, she's lucky to be alive, too." "Yeah?" Lloyd stroked her. Laurie looked up at him with her amber eyes. He wondered, as he almost always did, just what it was she saw in the face looking down into hers. Like the stars he saw when he took her out at night. It was a mystery. Gibson thanked him for the iced tea and left. Lloyd sat where he was for a little while, stroking his hand through the cloudy gray fur. Then he put his dog down to go about her business, while he went about his. It was life. You were stuck with it. And all you could do was live it. Hey there, everyone who's listening on YouTube, or those of you who are listening on the podcast. It's me, MrCreepyPasta, and before you head out for the night, I just wanted to let you know about a couple of things. Without you, the show doesn't take place. So, if you guys would like to support the show, or if you guys would like to get your hands on a couple of cool little things whenever new things come out, check out patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta, and any support that you guys show, I really appreciate. So everyone who's already donated to the Patreon, I really appreciate it. You guys are amazing. And thank you so much for that. If you guys are looking for more Creepypasta Storytime, there's a new video that's uploaded to this channel or uploaded to the podcast every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday now. You can be able to get more from me at facebook.com/MrCreepyPasta or on Twitter at MrCreepyPasta and then the number 0. Thanks so much for listening, kids, and for your support. And sweet dreams.